Here we can go over the function of the different cell organelles found in eukaryotic cells. This may help you prepare for your cell analogy project. The cell wall is found in plants but not animals. That is an important distinction. In plants, it is the outermost layer, so it is on the outside of the cell membrane. So here you can see the cell wall is represented in green. The cell membrane is beneath it in kind of this tan color. And it's made of cellulose, which is one of the different types of carbohydrates that exist out in the world. And its function is to support the plant so that it can grow tall. Think about trees, for example. They're really, really tall because they have this strong supportive cell wall. And it also protects each individual cell. The cell membrane is found in both plants and animal cells. In plants, it's the innermost layer inside of the cell wall. In animals, there is only a cell membrane. There is no cell wall, so it's the outermost layer of an animal cell. It's made of molecules called phospholipids, and then it also has embedded cholesterols and proteins. It is selectively permeable. That means that it is able to allow some things into the cell and prevent other things from entering the cell. You can think about that kind of like a screen on a window. If something really small wants to get through the screen, like air or water, it's able to go through. But if something large wants to go through a screen, like a moth or your cat, they can't fit through the holes on the screen. So the screen is also selectively permeable. So the cell membrane's job is to determine what goes in and out of a cell. And then it also provides some support and protection and helps the cell to maintain homeostasis because it can decide what goes in and out. The mitochondria in a plant or animal cell is kind of the power plant of the cell. It's a bean-shaped organelle, and it kind of has these like little structures that stick up. Those are the cristae. And its job is to break down sugars into energy. It produces energy and stores it in a molecule called ATP. And ATP, the full name is adenosine triphosphate, and that's the molecule that your cells use to power cellular activity. So the mitochondria converts energy from sugar energy to ATP energy. The endoplasmic reticulum in your cells comes in two forms. So there's the smooth endoplasmic reticulum and the rough endoplasmic reticulum. It's found in both plants and animals, and it's a network of tubes inside of the cell that move materials through the cell. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum is used to help make fats, and it can also help detoxify your cell, meaning it helps get rid of bad chemicals. And the rough endoplasmic reticulum assists with protein synthesis. So they have two different jobs. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum is the top picture, and you can see that it is tube-like and smooth on the surface. The rough endoplasmic reticulum has these little dots all over it. Those are ribosomes that are attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and that's why it's called rough, because it looks bumpy. Ribosomes, which are those dots on the surface of the rough endoplasmic reticulum, are also found in both plants and animals. They're little small bodies. They can either be free-floating in the cytoplasm of the cell or attached to the endoplasmic reticulum, and their function is to produce proteins. And so they receive instructions from the DNA in your nucleus, and then they can take those instructions and build the proteins that your body needs to survive. The Golgi complex is found again in both plants and animals, and its job is to process proteins, and then they can be exported from the cell. That means that they can be made in the cell and packaged in the cell and then sent outside of the cell for another job. They can also process proteins for use in the membrane of the cell. So sometimes the proteins that it processes do not leave the cell, but they can be used in things like enzymes or lysosomes. So it processes proteins, some of which can stay in the cell, some of which can be sent outside of the cell. The nucleus in the cell is found again in both plants and animals. It's kind of a large oval or round organelle. It contains a structure in the center called the nucleolus, and the function of the nucleus is to control the cell's activities. It contains the DNA that's inside of your cells, and the DNA determines which proteins are going to be manufactured by that cell. So if you have a cell, for example, in a hair follicle, that particular cell is probably going to produce a lot of keratin, which is the protein that hair is made out of. So the nucleus can determine which types of proteins are produced so that the cell can do its specific job. Surrounding the nucleus is something called the nuclear membrane, which is also called the nuclear envelope. This is found around the nucleus in both plants and animals. And again, that nuclear membrane surrounds the nucleus. Like the cell membrane, it is selectively permeable, which means it can control the movement of materials in and out of the nucleus. It also has openings on the outside of the nuclear membrane called pores, and those allow things like RNA fragments to leave the nucleus more easily, because DNA is housed in the nucleus and it sends its messages to the ribosomes in a molecule called RNA. Inside of the nucleus is another structure called the nucleolus, and it's a dense spherical structure. It takes up about 25% of the space inside of the nucleus, but its job is to edit RNA molecules, and it combines it with proteins to create ribosomes. So this is where part of the ribosome is manufactured and then sent outside of the nucleus to do its job. Another organelle found in cells are the centrioles. These are found in plants and animals, and they are important in cell division. So cells divide in half sometimes to reproduce, and the centrioles have a specific job where they pull apart copies of the DNA when the cell is dividing so that the two new cells each get a complete copy of the DNA. If you didn't have centrioles, the DNA might divide unevenly, so the two new cells that you make would not be identical to each other, nor would they be identical to their parent cell. In a cell, lysosomes have a specific job. The word lyse means to break things apart, so lysosomes break things apart. Lysosomes can be found in plants, but they are uncommon. They are very common in animal cells. These are small, round organelles. They have a membrane, and their job is to break down large molecules into small molecules, and they can also digest old cell parts. So if you've got a cell part that's no longer being used and it can be recycled, the lysosomes can break that cell part down and recycle the molecules that it was made of. Inside of a cell, you have something called cytoplasm, and it's found in both plants and animals, and it's the clear, thick, jelly-like material that fills the entire interior of the cell, and it includes all the organelles inside of the cell. So the cytoplasm provides kind of interior support and protection for the cell because it fills the cell and then surrounds all the organelles. Chloroplasts are organelles that are found only in plants, and their job is to do photosynthesis. So chloroplasts are green. They're what give plants their green color typically. They contain a chemical called chlorophyll, which is a green pigment. And the job of the chloroplast is to use energy from the sun to make food for the plant. And so the chloroplasts have this job that's called photosynthesis. That means using light, photo, to make things, which is what synthesis is. So chloroplasts make food for the plant. Typically, they make sugars to start with. A vacuole is a storage place. In plants, the vacuole usually is very large, and there's a large central vacuole in plants. In animals, they have vacuoles, but usually they have many small vacuoles. So it's the difference between like a plant, it would look like a garage, an animal cell would look more like a house with lots of little closets. They're fluid filled, and they can store food, they can store water, they can store waste. And the reason that a plant has especially large vacuoles is because they often store large amounts of food. And that's something they could store in the roots, for example, or like if you've ever eaten a potato, each of those cells has a vacuole that contains lots of starch because that's how those plants store their energy. The cytoskeleton inside of a cell is made up of protein filaments and tubules. So inside of a cell, there's a bunch of cytoplasm, so there's all that fluid, but then there's also these little proteins that are like filaments that extend through the cytoplasm and around the organelles that help the cell to maintain its shape from the inside. So just like we have a skeleton on the inside of our body, cells have a skeleton inside of their structures, and it's called a cytoskeleton because cyto, the prefix, means cell. A peroxisome is another small organelle, and peroxisomes specifically digest fats that will eventually be broken down by the mitochondria. Mitochondria need sugars as their raw material, and so if there's some fat that needs to be used for energy, it will need to be converted to sugars first, and it needs to be broken down. So peroxisomes can break down fats so that they can be converted to sugars and then used by the mitochondria.